we're going to talk about behavior, because all the lies that we have believed affect our behavior. There's no way that we can get around it, right? Okay. So this is Paul, right? Sweet Paul. And basically he's saying, I don't understand why I'm doing the things I don't like to do. That's basically what he's saying. I have no idea why I do the things I don't like to do. And so Paul didn't have this Bible study to explain it to him, because we now know that behind every single behavior is a lie. So maybe Paul didn't know the lies that he was believing at the time. I don't know. We'll find out when we get to heaven. Okay. So, but I do love it because it captures the confusion about why we do what we do. Because when you think about behavior, so people often ask this question of me, like, Cindy, when people do harmful and hurtful things to others, do they know what they're doing? And we grapple with this as humans because we would like to think that they're not knowing what they're doing, because that would be nice and it would be a prettier package. But the truth is that they do know what they're doing. Everybody knows what they're doing when they're doing it, unless they are in true denial, unless they are having a fight, flight, or freeze response, and the other part of the brain takes over, or unless they are in post-trauma grief situations. Other than that, we all know what we're doing at any given time. So even the most harmful acts, we know, right? When you think about Jesus being crucified, when they put the nails into his hands and feet, did they know that they were putting nails into his hands and feet? Yes. When they mocked him, did they know they were mocking him? When they served him sour wine, did they know they were serving him sour wine? Absolutely. We know what we do. There's no getting around it. I know what I do, and you know what you do. The confusion comes with the why behind it. And in those cases, in the crucifixion of Jesus, they didn't know who Jesus was. If they knew in their hearts who Jesus was, none of that would have occurred. So they didn't understand the why behind the behavior. And that's where we get so confused as humans. We don't know why we do it. So I might engage in an unhealthy behavior and know that I'm doing it, but I can't stop it because I don't know the why. If I can figure out the why, then I can change it. But I feel a little bit helpless until I figure out the why. So it's interesting, too, because the unhealthy choices that we make can fall into the category of sin. And if I love God, I've stood up here before you and professed my love for him, that he's the most important person in my life. So if that is true, why would I sin? That's where it gets tricky, right? We love the God with all of our hearts, but we still sin, and it doesn't make sense. Yeah? Well, we sin because we're human and we're not God, so there's no getting around it. But the more we know our worth in him, the less we will sin. And the more we feel unworthy, the more we will sin. That's just the bottom line. But the important thing to remember about sin, though, just like we talked about before, that our performance doesn't affect our worth, our performance is not our preciousness, our sin is also not who we are. No. That is not who I am. I sin, but the sin is not who I am. I have a sin nature, but I am not sin. It's important that we remember that, okay? In Romans 7:20, but if I am doing the very thing I do not want, I am no longer the one doing it, but sin which dwells in me. That's Paul Moore. He is saying, it's not me, it's the sin. I am not my sin. I am a different person from my behavior. I do those things. I know I'm doing those things, but it's not who I am on both the positive and the negative side. So does that excuse accountability for my behavior? If it's not me, should I not be accountable? No. If I'm engaging in a behavior, my accountability lies in figuring out why I'm doing it and the efforts to change it. I have to be responsible. I don't just excuse it away, right? It might not be my fault, but it is my responsibility. So when it comes to sin, there's kind of 3 categories that sin falls into. The first one would be premeditated sin, meaning I got myself a plan, right? When I think about this, I think about maybe spouses who cheat on each other. You don't just cheat. There are a billion decisions made before that event. It's planned, generally, right? Premeditated sin. It's something I think about that I'm going to carry out. Revenge. Harm towards another person. Calculated. Premeditated sin. The other type of category of sin, which I always like to call the reaction sin, it's unknown till it happens. Meaning, I'm just going about my business and somebody does something completely offensive and I go nuts. I didn't premeditate that. But in my inability to access self-control and in my anger, I lashed out. I had a reactive sin, right? And then the third category of sin is autopilot sin. It's just a habit. I know I'm doing it. I recognize it when it happens, but it just keeps happening all the time. It's a habitual sin. Gossip can be that way, right? Okay, so to make the changes, we have to understand what's behind them. And if there's a particular sin that's occurring time and time again in our lives, we can be assured that there's a stronghold behind it. There's a particular lie that is grounding us to that behavior. So our groups, this was actually coming out of one of the very first groups that we did, identified 12 core areas of people's lives where low self-worth can affect behavior. And those areas are friendship, romantic relationships, parenting, family members, our physical bodies, our finances, our mental health, our faith, work, life goals, and hobbies. So if I asked you in what areas low self-worth have contributed to your life, or in what ways specifically has low self-worth contributed to your life in those categories, you would give me a blank stare. So I did that for you. I didn't. The groups of women that have worked on this project did it together, I should say. Good friends. These are our behavior traps. When you look at your list, is it reflective of how you view your own worth? Or maybe when you started, before you got here? Because your worth has changed since you've been here. But before you got here, does it reflect that? When you look at all of the things that you put a check mark by, can you see the connection between just the idea of low self-worth and why we would engage in those behaviors? You can see the connection. Was there anything on the list, you may not want to answer this, I guess, and be vulnerable, we'll see, that you did not understand why you did it? Can we explain all of those behaviors through the low self-worth lens? We can. So you got to look at all of those behaviors, just like the lies, the personal lies, the global lies, the layered lies, we have to replace them. We are going to replace these behaviors with new behaviors. But we're not going to do a big giant to-do list, because that sounds terrible. We're not going to take each behavior and work on it for a week. Oh, that sounds awful. There's a long list. We're not going to do that. What's going to happen is that inadvertently, as you focus on unpacking the lies in your own worth, just like you didn't actively seek out purposefully to do those particular behaviors, the minute you start walking in worth and truth to the highest level, those behaviors will start to rectify themselves. We are going to do an active exercise with them, though, however. It's just not going to be done until we do the rebuilding in week 9, because it is part of the rebuilding process. So we are going to replace those behaviors with new behaviors, and we are going to do an active exercise to help us understand how to do that, but we are not going to do some goal-setting to-do list type deal. We want to go deep. We want to change the way we believe, and if we change the way that we believe, we will change our behavior. Hands down, without the to-do list. Matter of fact, if I did a to-do list on changing a behavior, I might have success for a little bit, but if I didn't change the belief, I would never have success. And it just sounds awful. So we're not going to do that. The one thing that I didn't address, though, on that list was some of our heavy-duty unhealthy coping. You'll notice on the list we didn't see addiction or alcohol or excessive spending or excessive eating or under-eating or exercise or sex. All the things that we use to soothe as humans when things get too big. But I want to address them because they are also connected to our worth. What's happening in those situations is that whatever's going on with us is too much, and we don't feel like we can soothe it ourselves, and we don't feel like God can soothe it. So we engage in a behavior that will soothe it temporarily just to alleviate the pain. And then, of course, we do it again, and then again, and then again, and we are stuck with addiction. So I wanted to just address it because we can't ignore it. And addiction will put a big time stop sign in front of your journey to self-worth. If you are addicted to something like any of the things we just talked about, you will not be able to do this work because you are putting that thing before God. Not on purpose. You didn't wake up and say, oh, please, I'd like to do meth today. That is not the way addiction works. You love God, but this is in the way, and you for sure cannot see him, right? And so I wanted to at least just address it, because if you are in that place where you are suffering from any kind of addiction, then I'm going to advise you, just like I did before with being stuck, to get some professional help from a trusted counselor, okay? But it's not in your notebooks, but it is very, very, very important. I think there's a paragraph in it, but it doesn't go in and address those specific behaviors. But I think we all need to be mindful of those behaviors as we're going through this journey. So we're going to replace the behaviors naturally by just changing our worth, but we are going to do an exercise in week 9. Ephesians 4:14 through 15 says, so that we may no longer be children tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him, who is the head, into Christ. The reason I read that is because I like the phrase, we are going to grow up in every way into him. When we change our worth, we will change our behavior. All of it is designed to grow up into him. All of the growth is designed to take away that separation and grow closer to him.